Hi guys, I hope you're all well. I had recently made a post saying I would share some insights on how I manage data, especially photographs. When I go to the field, come back with photographs, sometimes 50, 60, 70, 100 GBs of photos. How do I manage my data? How do I store them? How do I back them up? And I thought, let me make a holistic video. It could be a long video because there's so much to discuss in that. So please stay tuned and check out this video, and I'm sure it will be a great learning for whoever wants to manage their images well. So I hope my screen is visible to you. This is basically my desktop. I must tell you that I use multi-device setup for managing my files. For example, I do have a Mac Mini which is connected to my BenQ monitor, which you can see here. This is the Mac Mini, which has a 1 terabyte hard disk, which is a 16 GB RAM, very powerful machine, which I use all the time when I come back to my home computer, which is my most used computer. And of course, I have a MacBook Air, which I use on travel, which is exactly the same as my Mac Mini, but it's a smaller system. It also is an M1 processor like my Mac Mini, which means it's pretty powerful. I do not have a 16 GB M1 MacBook Air. It is just 8 GB. I feel even 8 GB is quite powerful because of the operating system running on an M1 chip instead of Intel like it used to be before. So I use a MacBook Air, I use a Mac Mini, and I also have an iPad Pro, which I feel is very versatile with respect to usability, access, to show images, to do presentations, to quickly edit images on the fly. So let's spend some time and understand how all these things together fall in place for me, and I'd like to take you through my process. So first of all, I'd like to show you my computer, what happens in my computer. So this is my, let's say, my Finder on my Mac. In my Mac, I have, even though 1 terabyte of space on the Mac Mini, I do not store any raw files on my Mac, which you see here. Basically, what I store here is my catalog files. So if you know Lightroom very well, you understand Lightroom uses catalogs. Now this is my folder where I store all my catalog. Before we start talking about catalogs, I must talk to you about cloud. So I'm sure today's era, most of you understand what is cloud storage. I have two kinds of cloud storage that I use simultaneously. One is called Microsoft OneDrive. So my whole computer, for example, if you go to my computer, my whole computer sits inside a folder called OneDrive, and this gets backed up to the server. Let me just go ahead and show you where my OneDrive is. I just need to find OneDrive here. This is OneDrive. It comes and sits on the top of your computer here. This is OneDrive. All my computer files are inside the OneDrive folder. So the theory is, if I upload something inside this folder, which is my OneDrive folder, this software sitting on the top uploads this to my cloud, which means I can go on my OneDrive web access and access that file there. So I actually do not have to manually back up anything. Like for example, this is my files. If I go ahead and put any file in this folder here, which is basically what my OneDrive folder is, it gets to the cloud within no time. We could do a quick experiment just for you to understand how this works. So let's go to, okay, let's just take this book1.xls without really discussing what is there in that. And I go ahead and just paste this book1.xls in this folder here, which is sitting here now, by the way. I'm just going to increase the thumbnail size to show you. Now, book1.xls, it's sitting here. Now, the moment I do that, my Microsoft OneDrive is going to get information that I have a new file sitting in my OneDrive now, which is not backed up to the cloud. And while I'm doing other things, this gets uploaded in a matter of few minutes and goes to my cloud. And once I come to the cloud here and I access my file here, it's going to come there. I'll allow that to happen in a few minutes. I don't want to waste my time waiting for that to happen. It's actually already uploaded, as you can see here. It's saying uploaded OneDrive. Now, if I come here and go to my recent, or if I go to my files folder, you will see that OneDrive book1.xls has got uploaded to my cloud less than 1 minute ago, which means I don't have to manually back up. That's the theory of using cloud. Now, Interestingly, I have my entire computer inside the OneDrive, which means even if I crash my Mac Mini, within a few hours I can download all of them because they're all backed up to the cloud. Now let's go back to my desktop. And what I want to show you is how I work with my Lightroom catalogs. Now I have created a folder. If you see the path of this one, it says OneDrive LR catalogs, which means I have a folder called Lightroom catalogs. All these folders are my catalogs sitting here, segregated by year wise. For instance, 2019, I had these 4 major trips, which means I have a catalog called Big Cat Week December 19. I had a catalog called Kabini, MP December, Patagonia Feb, Ranthambore May. Each one of them is a catalog. Now, why do we need to make sure we have catalogs which are also backed up properly? It's because you spend 1 second to click a photo. You spend much more time to edit those photos. Imagine if the catalog is corrupted, or let's say it is deleted, for instance. Your hard work on the computer is all gone for a toss. It's a waste, right? So it's important to not just back up raw files. It's also important to back up your catalog. So every catalog of mine, the moment I finish working on that, where is that in my... Okay, look at this. This is my cloud. Inside my cloud, the exact folder structure, let me go ahead and show thumbnails for you. The exact folder structure that you see in my local computer here, all these files are sitting here. Which means any catalog I work on my computer right now and make changes, it gets uploaded to the cloud and there's a backup on the cloud. I can access my catalog from anywhere in the world if I'm connected to the internet. So that's the theory of using cloud storage to backup files. Based on my experience, guys, one of the things that I don't recommend is if you have to intervene and if you have to do something to back up files, that's never going to happen because, we are human beings. We are not going to be so judicious. We are not going to do that in such meticulous frequency that we may, benefit from it. So I recommend doing automated backups where you don't have to do anything. Now, let's come back to the scenario. Now, let's say I went to the field and I shot a lot of photographs and I have a memory card. For example, this memory card, which is an 80 GB memory card, I'm just going to use a card drive. Since this is a CFast A card drive, which is used by most of the Sony advanced cameras, I can put that in my memory card and connect to my computer. And let's see what happens once I go back to my computer. So I have a hard disk, which is called a LrC 5.6 TB, which also has a sister folder here, as you can see. All my files from 2007 are on this hard disk. So 2007, all my files, depending on which trip I went, then 2008, then I have another partition, which is called LrC 5.6. Inside that, I have my photograph raw files. And in that, I have a folder from 2009 to 14, then I have 15 to 17. And of course, from 18, I use another hard disk called J8TBB. So inside this, I have 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and outside that I have 15, 16, 17 files. Inside 15 itself, for example, each trip will have a folder and raw files are sitting in that. If you go to 8 TB, here again I have a folder which is having images all the way from 2018 till today. Like last week I came back from Kenya, that folder is here, and all the pictures I've shot in 2022. My goodness, in the last 6 months I've done a lot of shooting. All those files are sitting inside this. So this is how I store my files on my local ecosystem. So in other words, there are 2 hard disks, guys. One is a 6 terabyte hard disk, which has all my files until 2017. And now a 8 terabyte hard disk, which has all my files from 2018 to today. Now, some people may have multiple hard disks and they may keep copies of them in multiple places. But based on my experience, I have realized how many ever hard disks you have, hard disks fail. I do not want to depend on hard disks forever. So I have realized, I have fine-tuned my mind. I have realized I want to keep my raw files on the cloud as well, which is where I use the Google's cloud storage. So basically, let me take you to the Google's cloud storage to give an example of what goes on here. It's basically a 10 terabyte storage that I have, and I have backed up my entire hard disks with those raw files to the cloud. Takes a while for you to do that, but once it is done, it is done. For example, my Mac Mini has 3 folders which are synced with my cloud. So what are those three folders? One is my 8 TB raw files, which I basically showed you that it is here. This folder, I'll increase the thumbnails of this as well. 8 TB raw files. Then I have 2007 to 2008. Then I have 15 to 17 as well. Where is 2007 to 2008? That's here in this hard disk. Inside this 2007 this one 2007 and 2008. And after that, I have also backed up my files from 2015 to 2017. I still haven't uploaded files from 2009 to 14 on my cloud, which is currently going on right now because I recently upgraded from a 5 TB to a 10 TB. So let me summarize what I've said. I keep files in my local hard disk. I also have about 10 terabyte of cloud storage. How much does that cost for me? About 3,300 rupees every month. It may seem like a huge cost to you, but for me as a professional, that's something I do need to invest in order to protect my files and keep them on the cloud. Because if there's a fire in my home, all my files are gone forever. So I prefer another location, which is not my home, so that even if there is theft or there's fire, my raw files, which are my hard-earned photographs, are sitting on the cloud. So you may not want to do that, but I'm just telling you what I do, because for me, the raw files are pretty important to go to the cloud. So that's how I work. Now, let's understand how you could do image transfer from the field and how you can come back and use these systems. Let's say you downloaded all the raw files from this memory card. You can download them to this hard disk. For example, let's say I'm going tomorrow to another place. I'm going to go here, 2022. I'm going to create a new folder here, and let's call this new folder as Heaven. So I'm going to Heaven tomorrow, and I'm just going to download my raw files, which are sitting inside this, into my Heaven folder, and I'm going to use Lightroom in order to bring those files into my permanent hard disk. Where is the permanent hard disk, guys? Remember, it's my 8 terabyte hard disk, inside which there is a 8 terabyte storage, 2022, inside that Heaven folder, and all my files come here. The moment my files come here, since I'm on Google's cloud, I have disabled the sync right now because I want the files to be segregated properly before they go to the cloud. So I can enable this and say resume syncing. The moment I have some new file inside this folder here, this one, remember, that's what is backed up here, 8 terabyte, whatever is there, any new file starts getting uploaded to the cloud. In fact, it was just happening. I just paused it. These were the files which were queued and which was getting uploaded. This is a system that most of you already know if you're using Lightroom. Now, if you're using a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro, you can do the exact same thing using a MacBook Pro device, which is right now here, or a MacBook Air device. Connect your hard disk to that and then be done with this kind of a system. But I wanted to share another insight of how, in case you don't want to carry a MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro, you want to use your iPad, which is one of the most exciting devices for us to use on the field, in the flight, in the airport, while on the transit. Then let's figure out how to do that. So what I'm going to do, guys, is now connect this hard disk, this memory card reader, which has my 80 GB memory card, and I connect it not to my laptop, not to my Mac Mini, but to my iPad. So I'm just going to connect my memory card using the card reader to my iPad. If you can see in this screen here, it's connected to my iPad. Now I'm just going to use my pencil here, and I'm just going to go to files to show you those files. Just for the sake of this understanding, I have used the iPad's files protocol here. In files, I have selected the hard disk, which is of course the memory card, which has 3 raw files right now. Because we're just trying to understand the architecture, I don't want to use too many files and delay the process. Now there are 3 raw files sitting here. So let's say there's a use case of you having to use these raw files and bring them to the iPad. And what do we do on the iPad? We may use the Photos protocol on iPad. I'll just delete this. I just made this post a couple of days ago. Delete photo. Okay. We may use the Photos protocol on iPad, and we may also use the Lightroom mobile or the Lightroom feature on the iPad. So let's say if you want these raw files which are sitting here, you can go ahead and do select all, and then you can go ahead and you can copy these 3 items and you can bring them to your camera roll or your pictures. But I wouldn't do that because I don't want to increase the size on my camera roll, because that will get uploaded to my phone as well. It will sync multiple devices. Instead, I'm just going to go ahead and open Lightroom. I want all of you to understand there are two versions of Lightroom. One is called Lightroom, another is called Lightroom Classic. Lightroom Classic is what you can see on my desktop here. Lightroom is what you can see on the iPad here. You can also use Lightroom on the desktop, but since I use Lightroom Classic, which is much more powerful and has a lot more features, I permanently use Lightroom Classic for my storage and of course for my editing for the long run. But here's a use case where I have a short-term use case of downloading images from memory card to a hard disk and then making sure I can play with them while on the field. When I come back, I want to send all those files to my 8 terabyte hard disk, which in turn gets uploaded to the Google Cloud as well. So here I am. I'm in Lightroom, absolutely no images. I want you to understand, how does Lightroom work? First of all, the architecture of Lightroom is it basically needs to have a cloud storage. So by default, when you buy your photography plan, which has Lightroom and Photoshop, you get 100 GB of space, which is of course what you can see on the screen right now. 100 GB of space which you can use on the cloud. 100 GB is minuscule. It can get over in one day if you have a 20-30 frames per second camera with a 40-50 megapixel kind of a shooting. It's not much at all. So what do I do, guys? I go ahead and first disable this particular feature. This is basically syncing right now, but I just go ahead and say pause syncing. I do not want my iPad to sync to the cloud. Why? Because I don't have space on the cloud in Adobe's cloud. Remember, it's quite expensive to have space on Adobe's cloud. I use Google Cloud, for which I don't use Lightroom, but I use a manual method of sending them to the cloud. So bear with me. Let's figure out what to do. Now, I'm going to go ahead and import those files from my hard disk, which is the memory card, which is the 80 GB A card. And I'm going to select all these photographs and I'm going to say select all. And when I say open, these 3 photographs are going to be imported from this memory card to my Lightroom. And where is Lightroom here, guys? It's on my iPad. I'm still in Africa, let's say. I've not come to India. I've not gone to my Mac Mini yet. I have downloaded these 3 pictures. As soon as I do that, I can eject my memory card, which has this 80 GB card. I can put it back to the camera. I can format it and start using. So we are done with downloading images from the memory card to the iPad. Now, I want you to understand, in my iPad, I have 512 GB space. Now, 512 GB space, out of which 480 GB is empty. I use this iPad predominantly for this job. I don't fill it up with a lot of nonsense because I want this space. 500 GB is also too less if you spend 10 days in Africa, but that's how I do it. Now I have 3 photographs inside Lightroom and they're not synced yet, guys. If I start syncing, then what will happen is these raw files will go up to the cloud and it will take space on my, why don't I do that? I'll resume syncing. It will take space on my Adobe Cloud. Now, if I have a Lightroom mobile on my phone, it'll also download those smart previews on my phone. While I don't want to do this, I just wanted to show you how it works. Let it keep uploading in the background. Now, on the field itself, iPads can go wrong. There could be any problem which happens. So I cannot just rely on having files on my iPad, which is where, guys, I use this hard disk, which is what is called a SanDisk. It's a 2 terabyte hard disk. It has a 2 GB per second transfer data, pretty fast. It costs about 35 to 40,000 rupees. It's a 2 TB, but you could have a 500 GB for much lesser. I believe in SSDs because they last longer, they don't corrupt, they don't crash as easily as traditional hard disks. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to connect this SSD hard disk to my iPad. This is my iPad's cable. It's a USB-C to a USB-C, and I have connected my hard disk, which is my 2 terabyte hard disk, which is sitting here, and that's what I do. Right now I have my Kenya files there, but just for you to understand, I'm going to create a new folder here, and let's call this new folder as heaven as well, because you know why? We went to heaven, we shot 3 photos and we have come back. Now what I need to do is I need to send those pictures. Right now it's only 3, but imagine there are 3,000. I want to send these pictures to my hard disk. Why? Because I don't want to keep only one copy of my files on my iPad. God forbid something happens, I won't have a backup. So what I'm going to do, go and select all the photos. Actually, it's a great idea if you can spend some time on the iPad and cull images and only send reasonably good ones. But since we don't want to do that, we don't have time on the field, I'm going to select all the files and then I'm going to go ahead and say share. When I'm going to share, I don't want to share to my camera roll. I don't want to export to camera roll. I don't want to export to files because files are also on the iPad. Instead, I go ahead and say, I want you to export as original, not as a JPEG. I want you to export them as an original, which means it's basically a transfer of data. And where does it have to go? I'm going to say, I want to save them to files, and inside files, I'm going to go ahead and select my hard disk, which is my 2 terabyte hard disk. Inside the 2 terabyte hard disk, I want them to go to heaven. And then I say save. It's going to save them to my external hard disk. It may take a few minutes. If you want, we can go to my external hard disk, check heaven, and we have got the 3 files there. So what's right to do now, guys, is eject this particular hard disk, which is the 2 terabyte hard disk, on the iPad and keep it safe. Now, let's say we have spent 10 days in Africa and we have come back to India. Now, for the moment, we do not need to use the iPad because we finished playing around in the iPad. We made some changes while we were on the field. For example, let's say I opened this image on the field, or I went to Ranthambore in this case, and I went and edited this image. I made some changes to the light, exposure, contrast, and all of that using my pencil, using my fingers, zooming in, zooming out, playing on the iPad, and have come back. Now, the thing is, since this image has an update, it is taking time to upload these to the cloud. But I don't really care about them. I don't need them on the cloud at all. I have already backed them up to my hard disk here. Now let's come back to Bangalore. Let's come back to my desktop. Now I'm going to connect my hard disk, this one, to my Mac Mini. I'm going to connect them to my Mac Mini, and let's go to my laptop here. And I can actually be downloading them from my 2 terabyte hard disk to my 8 terabyte hard disk, which is my permanent location. I'm just waiting for this hard disk to show up. It's just shown up. Inside that, there's the heaven folder here. Inside the heaven folder, there are 3 photographs here. So I could simply copy heaven here, and I can go to my 8 terabyte, go to 8 terabyte 2022 folder, and inside heaven, I can delete this or overwrite that and say replace that. And those 3 files are now in my 8 terabyte hard disk inside that. And the moment I go ahead and enable this to be syncing with cloud, without my knowledge, overnight these 3 files will go to my Google Cloud. That way I have now a copy on my iPad, I have a copy on the SSD hard disk, I have a copy on the 8 terabyte folder, and I have a copy on the Google Cloud as well. Once I've done with that, I could actually get rid of this folder from my SSD hard disk. This is my SSD hard disk. Why? Because I need space for my next trip. They're already backed up to my permanent hard disk, which is the 8 TB, which is here in 2022 heaven. And I don't need them on this anymore. So I can go ahead and say delete. I can go ahead and do recycle bin, create that space in my SSD hard disk as well. I might as well do the same on my iPad as well. I wouldn't want these images on my iPad now that they've already been backed up to my computer. So I might as well go and say delete from here. They'll go to my deleted folder. Even here, I can say select photos, or I can say permanently delete all. All the 3 photos from my Lightroom also gets deleted. Where all does it get deleted? It gets deleted on my Lightroom and also from the cloud. And it won't sync to any other device now because it's deleted from one device and the cloud. It will not be there on any other device. So let's summarize what we did. We got files on the iPad. We played around with it while on the field, and we backed them up to an SSD hard disk. Once we came back to Bangalore, we also have them downloaded to our hard disk, and it's sitting there. Now let's say you want to work with the cloud. For example, let's say you have a lot of space on Adobe's cloud. Then what you could do is you could use a Lightroom catalog on Classic to download files from the Adobe cloud. Absolutely without your intervention, it can bring files from the cloud all the way to your hard disk. I'll demo that to you right away. Okay, let's say we go to this particular folder, and let's go to 8 TB hard disk. Let's go here again. Let's pick up the heaven folder, 3 pictures. I'll go back to Heaven. I'll go back to my SSD hard disk and I'll just paste them here for a bit. I want to show you one photograph. I'm going to eject this on my computer. Let's come back to our iPad and let's do the re-import again just to show you how it works. Okay. Now in iPad, I will go ahead and I will import one photograph instead of three. Where is that? I'm going to go ahead to files. From files, I'm going to find 2 TB hard disk in that Heaven folder. I'll just take one photograph. Let's take this one and we will import that into our computer. And basically this is getting uploaded to the cloud. It may take a few minutes depending on the internet speeds. So we'll have to bear with that. As soon as this gets uploaded, it's going to show up in the cloud and in all other devices where you're using Lightroom, not Lightroom Classic. So when you come back to your computer here and you have Lightroom Classic, what I have done is I have created a catalog which is inside my catalogs folder, and I call this catalog as what do I call this catalog as? I call this catalog as iPad importer. This one I call this catalog as iPad importer. It's sitting here, and in iPad importer I have absolutely no photographs because this is a temporary classic catalog. And I want you to observe this, guys. I go to preferences. In preferences, I'm going to tell my catalog in Lightroom Classic that every picture that is there in the cloud on Adobe's cloud server needs to be downloaded to this folder. Which folder? I can select which folder that is on my Mac Mini. And I have selected a folder which is basically sitting here in my 8 TB, and I call this iPad LR Auto Downloads. If you have space on the cloud, you could be bringing files from the cloud and selecting this folder on your Lightroom Classic on your desktop, and without your knowledge, the file comes to your local computer. Let me see if I have a smaller file for us to download. So just give me a second. I'm just going to show you a smaller file so that we can quickly simulate this. Okay, let's take this image. I'm just going to send this to my iPad. Okay, just hold on for a second. Okay, I'm just going to send it to my iPad just to show you how we don't have to do with this file here. We'll just delete this file because it's a A7R4 heavy file. I don't want this file to take too much time for us to learn. So now I have actually sent a file to my iPad. Now this picture, I want to import it to my Lightroom. So I'll just go ahead and say I want to import a photograph. It's already come to Lightroom now. Now from here, it can get to the cloud and easily upload this file. Since it's a few MB and not GBs, 7080 GB was the file for that, 7080 MB was the file for that A7R4's raw file. This is a few megabytes or even probably kilobytes, 70, 80, 90, 100. Let's find out what's the kilobyte. This one is basically right click info. This one is 1.5 MB. It's still not small because it's a very high resolution file which was made into a 72 dpi, but right now it's getting uploaded to the cloud. Now let this upload happen on my iPad. Meanwhile, what happens here is, since I have already connected and I'm syncing my Lightroom Classic to the Lightroom cloud, which is Lightroom, that file should appear in my Classic here in a few minutes. Now, where does that get downloaded, guys? If you go to Lightroom's preferences and go and say storage, it will go to your iPad LR Auto Downloads folder that I have myself selected. It needs a few minutes for it to get synced and it comes back to that folder. So let's go to that folder now and let's wait for it to come here. I don't know where it is. It will be segregated according to the date of creation. So we'll wait for that folder to come. Let it come to Lightroom first here. The moment it gets synced to Lightroom, then immediately it gets connected to the hard disk and downloads them. Now let's wait for a few seconds to see if this picture has got uploaded, and then I'll show you how this picture comes to our desktop. Okay, on my iPad right now, you can see it says all synced. You can notice that it says all synced and backed up. Let's go to my desktop. Okay, now on my desktop as well, you can see that image has come back from the cloud. Why? Because I was syncing from the cloud and it has come here. Now, the good thing about this is, where is this photograph now in my Lightroom Classic? You can say right click and show in Finder. It's going to show this photograph in your 8 TB hard disk's iPad LR auto downloads 2012 September 2nd. That's when I shot this image, it seems, and it has come to that folder and it is sitting there. So if you understand, guys, from your iPad, if you sync to the cloud, it sits on the Adobe cloud. Let's say you have purchased a lot of space on the Adobe cloud. This is the method to use in that case. And from the Adobe cloud, you could simply connect your Lightroom Classic and download them and select a folder where you want them to be in your permanent hard disk. So let's summarize what we have discussed, guys. If you don't use cloud storage on Adobe, then use your iPad as just an interface to download for the time being. Have hard disks in iPad connected, copy them to your hard disk, come back to your computer, and then use a classic catalog and import them. For example, I'll go to my catalog called Kenya, where one photo is still syncing with Lightroom. Do you want to shut down? And okay, for the time being, I can shut that down, skip this backup. And I will go to my catalog, which is the classic catalog, which is where I do all my work. But if you don't have a problem using Adobe's cloud, you can simply upload them from your Lightroom to the cloud, and from the cloud to Lightroom Classic, and you can download them to your computer. So these are my pictures from Lightroom Classic, which actually connects to my hard disk, which is the 8 TB hard disk. No more cloud business in this right now, because it was in my hard disk, it went to the cloud, and it came back to my Lightroom Classic, or from my hard disk, it directly went to my Classic, and from my 8 terabyte hard disk, it got uploaded to Google Cloud as well. So this is the infrastructure I use depending on the kind of place I'm traveling to. I may take my MacBook Air, which has also software like Adobe Premiere, which also has software like Lightroom Classic, and I can use this as well as my Mac Mini. Or if I just want a quick interface to download raw files to my iPad and copy them to my SSD hard disk, I use an iPad as well. And both of them, I use this hard disk to copy them from the iPad to this hard disk, or the MacBook Air to this hard disk, and come back to my desktop, which is the Mac Mini, and download all the files from this hard disk to the 8 terabyte hard disk. And finally, from the 8 terabyte hard disk, it gets uploaded to the Google Cloud. You may be having another cloud service, but I use Google Cloud for all my files. Costs 3,000 rupees plus every month, but for me, it's absolutely worth it. I hope this was a very informational video on my workflow and my data storage mechanisms. Remember not just to back up raw files in multiple hard disks, and if possible to the cloud, also back up the Lightroom catalogs to the cloud. Remember, I use Microsoft OneDrive to upload my catalogs to the cloud, and I use Google Cloud to upload my raw files to the cloud. I have a local hard disk, which is an 8 TB hard disk for all the raw files. I have a 6 TB hard disk for earlier raw files. And of course, I have multiple copies of these SSD hard disks that I take to the field to download data quickly. And they're also they're waterproof, they're weatherproof, and they can be abused a bit, not like the traditional hard disks. So that's what I do, guys. I hope it was an exhaustive. It's taken 35 minutes for us to discuss this. I hope it was useful. And do let me know if you have any questions. Please feel free to ask me questions about Lightroom. I have a very long Lightroom course, 10.5 hours course, where image management in Lightroom is a very big emphasis. Please let me know if I can help you in any way. Take care and have fun.